On the 22nd of May, India's Prime Minister Mr. Modi visited Papua New Guinea, a Pacific Rim nation situated north of Australia. Prime Minister James Marape received Prime Minister Modi at the airport and, in a surprising move, touched his feet in the traditional Indian gesture of respect to elders. It's surprising to note and interesting to note that Prime Minister Modi's visit to the nation for the third FIPIC summit, which was being planned for nearly a year, almost never happened because of a serious breach of diplomatic protocol forced upon Papua New Guinea by the United States. The US President Mr. Biden inserted himself into the event and then eventually pulled out essentially at the last moment. Please subscribe and let's find out what happened. So, Mr. Modi's objective for visiting Papua New Guinea was to attend the FIPIC summit. What is FIPIC? It's the Forum for India-Pacific Islands Cooperation. It's a multinational grouping that was established in 2014 by Prime Minister Modi. The objective of this grouping of nations is to foster cooperation between India and 14 Pacific Island countries. Countries such as the Cook Islands, Fiji, Kiribati, the Marshall Islands, Micronesia, Nauru, Niue, Palau, Papua New Guinea, Samoa, Solomon Islands, Tonga, Tuvalu, and Vanuatu. So these nations have large and resource-rich exclusive economic zones, EEZs. Except for Papua New Guinea, these are all tiny, almost powerless nations in the geopolitical context. They have tiny populations and tiny militaries. Their militaries are essentially just like police forces. So these nations are tiny nations which have immense oceanic resources and other kinds of resources. And these islands are located in an increasingly strategically important region, the South Pacific, the Pacific Ocean region. Now, India wants to invest in key sectors in these nations: oil and gas, pharmaceuticals, education, fisheries, mining, food, fertilizers, space, industry, sugar, minerals, ores, information technology, solar energy, hydroelectricity, defense cooperation, agriculture, and much more. So FIPIC is about promoting India's strategic and commercial interests in ways that are mutually beneficial for India as well as for the Pacific Island nations. It's about creating a free, open, and inclusive Indo-Pacific region. It's about positioning India as a viable, benevolent, non-threatening alternative to China and also possibly to the USA. It's also interesting to note that Mr. Xi Jinping, China's president, visited Fiji 2 days after Prime Minister Modi visited it in 2014 for the first FIPIC summit. So we are witnessing an emerging tussle between China and India and, of course, the United States, which is the traditional hegemonic power in the region. So FIPIC is part of India's Act East initiative. So let's understand the timeline of FIPIC. So on the 19th of November 2014, Prime Minister Modi visited Fiji. The capital of Fiji is Suva. And this was the first visit by an Indian Prime Minister to Fiji since Prime Minister Indira Gandhi visited in 1981. So Prime Minister Modi, during this visit to Fiji, met the heads of state from 14 Pacific Island states. So this was the inaugural FIPIC summit. And during this summit, Prime Minister Modi proposed a forum for India-Pacific Islands cooperation, which is now called FIPIC. And he proposed that a summit of this multilateral organization should be held on a regular basis. So the first summit was in 2014, a few months after Prime Minister Modi became the Prime Minister of India. The second summit was held in August 2015. It was held in Jaipur in India. During the summit, Prime Minister Modi said that the Pacific Island nations are large ocean countries and not small island states. Mr. Modi said that the India-FIPIC relationship is a partnership of equals. He said that India is proud to be your development partner. You can count on India to be a reliable partner. We are ready to share our experiences and capabilities with you without hesitation. He said that we believe in multilateralism and we support a free, open, and inclusive Indo-Pacific. So that was the second summit. After that, there was a significant hiatus, which was exacerbated by the coronavirus pandemic and all that. And the third summit was to be held on the 22nd of May 2023, this year, in Port Moresby, the capital of Papua New Guinea. And this was to be co-hosted by India and Papua New Guinea, essentially to be co-hosted by Prime Minister Modi and the Papua New Guinea Prime Minister, Mr. James Marape. This was going to be the first visit by an Indian Prime Minister to the island nation. So Papua New Guinea is India's biggest trade partner among the FIPIC nations. If you see the map, you can see it's a reasonably large nation. It's the largest FIPIC nation. It has more than 600 islands. It contains the world's third largest rainforest. It has more than 45,000 kilometers of coral reefs. Papua New Guinea is one of the most unexplored countries on the planet. It's a very underdeveloped nation. Electricity and running water are still not readily available to all people, and it's a very resource-rich nation, full of minerals and oil and gas and copper and gold and such like. So India seeks to make large investments in this nation. So this summit, the third summit, was planned for a very long time, nearly a year. And Prime Minister Modi's visit was going to be accompanied by a high-level business delegation, Indian business delegation to Papua New Guinea. Now, in early May, it emerged that the US President Biden had decided to gatecrash the FIPIC summit. Mr. Biden announced that he would visit Papua New Guinea on the same day as the summit, 22nd of May, and he would visit for only 3 hours. And Mr. Biden also instructed the prime ministers of Australia and New Zealand to visit Papua New Guinea on the same day, the 22nd of May. So as a consequence of this, what was meant to be a full day summit, FIPIC summit, between the Indian Prime Minister and the heads of state of the Pacific Islands became only a 90-minute event. And because of this, Prime Minister Modi's visit came under doubt. Now, the Indian media naturally accused Papua New Guinea of poor diplomatic behavior and of breaching important diplomatic protocols, which obviously is correct. And the Indian media said that Papua New Guinea offered Prime Minister Modi a secondary status compared to US President Biden. They said that Papua New Guinea agreed to allow Biden to gate crash the FIPIC summit for unknown reasons. Now let's examine this in a realistic manner. Did Papua New Guinea have any choice? Imagine you're a small-time businessman. Your name is James. You're James, you're a small-time businessman. Your business is not doing great and you desperately need investments. Now your rich friend Narendra offers to invest in your business. He says, let's meet at your place for dinner on the 22nd of May at 7 p.m., let's say. And let's finalize the investment over dinner. So if you are James, it's wonderful news, you are overjoyed. And then you, James, you receive a phone call from the biggest mafia gangster in town. His name is Joe. Joe says, I'm coming over for dinner. I'm inviting myself to your house on the 22nd of May, 7 p.m. And I'm going to bring 2 of my minions with me, your neighbors, Australia and New Zealand. And I look forward to your hospitality. I look forward to a great dinner. I'm going to take care of you, James. I'm going to make sure you don't get hurt by nobody. And then Joe hangs up. So what will James do in this situation? What choice does he have? Can the little guy stand up to the bullying and the implicit threats of the biggest mafia gangster in town? Of course not. James has no choice but to agree and do whatever the mafia gangster is telling him to do. And that's how the US inserted itself into what was supposed to be the FIPIC summit. And that's why Prime Minister Modi's visit became doubtful. It came under doubt. And the FIPIC summit itself came under doubt. And the first consequence of this action was that the Indian business delegation, its visit to Papua New Guinea, was cancelled. So understand this. Who does this US maneuver help? It helps China. So China seeks to entrench itself in the Pacific Islands region. It understands that this is an extremely strategically important region. It understands that these islands have very large exclusive economic zones that are full of resources that China seeks. And we know that the recent China Solomon Islands deal has become the latest flashpoint between China and the US, one of the latest flashpoints between the two nations. And China seeks to enter into similar deals and also, hopefully, from their perspective, debt traps with other Pacific Islands nations. In contrast to China, India is a safe, non threatening, benevolent alternative to China. So, this US skullduggery ended up helping China. And isn't China the number one enemy of the US? So, it's strange that the US did this. So, Prime Minister Modi's travel plans were that he would visit Hiroshima, Japan on the 19th of May for the G7 summit. Then he would visit Papua New Guinea on the 22nd of May for the FIPIC summit. And then he would be in Australia on the 23rd and 24th of May for his state visit to Australia. Now, on the 17th of May, 2 days before the G7 summit, US President Biden cancelled his trip to Papua New Guinea. He attended the G7 meeting in Hiroshima, but he did not visit Papua New Guinea. And the reason that was given was that he did this in order to focus on the debt ceiling discussions and talks in Washington. And the Australian Prime Minister Albanese also did not visit Papua New Guinea. The New Zealand Prime Minister Chris Hipkins did visit on the 22nd of May. And in place of Mr. Biden, the US Secretary of State Anthony Blinken visited Papua New Guinea on the 22nd of May, and both nations, PNG and the US, signed a defense cooperation agreement. Eventually, Prime Minister Modi's visit did happen. The FIPIC summit also happened, and Prime Minister James Marape touching Prime Minister Modi's feet may possibly be gratitude, a sign of gratitude, and it may possibly be done in order to convey the nation's respect to India and to Prime Minister Modi, in contrast to the fear that Papua New Guinea would feel with respect to the US. Mr. Marape said that the Pacific Islands will rally behind India. He also said that we are victims of a global power play. So, yeah, that makes a few things a little more clear. Overall, it was a good, productive, successful FIPIC summit. Prime Minister Modi was conferred with Papua New Guinea's highest civilian award and Fiji's highest civilian award. An interesting side note is that the current Fiji Prime Minister, Sitiveni Rabuka, was once nicknamed Colonel Steve Rambo. He launched 2 military coups in 1987. The first coup toppled an Indo-Fijian majority government. At that time, in the 1980s, the Indo-Fijians were the majority ethnic group in Fiji until the late 1980s. And Rabuka had a very strong anti-Indo-Fijian stance. Now, Rabuka became Prime Minister on the 24th of December 2022. And he has now apologized multiple times for his actions. Especially, he has issued apologies to the Indo-Fijian community. And Rabuka has now pivoted to what could possibly be regarded as being pro-India. So it's very clear that politicians respect power and money. India now is a much more powerful nation compared to what it was in the 1980s. And India is a way more richer nation. So that engenders some respect. So India was able to make the FIPIC summit happen, and it was productive and successful, but the Indian business delegation's visit was cancelled because of the American actions. So the US did succeed in derailing that component of the summit. Now the question is, why did Joe Biden back off? Why did President Biden back off? Did India convince his handlers to have him back off? Was this back-channeled Indian diplomacy at work? So the reason that was given was that Joe Biden did this in order to focus on the debt limit ceiling talks in Washington. This sounds like a plausible reason. He also cancelled the Quad summit. So the reason sounds plausible. So maybe it's not Indian diplomacy that did this. Maybe it was a genuine reason. The US objective may have been to simply derail the Indian trade delegation's visit to Papua New Guinea, or maybe they just wanted to send some kind of a message to India. So it is interesting to note that the US is actively hampering India's economic and trade initiatives in the Pacific Islands region. The US talks about a free, open, and inclusive Indo Pacific region. It has created the Quad as essentially an anti China grouping, but the US is also at the same time doing its best to prevent India from expanding its economic and trade footprint in the region. So the US both supports India on some issues and at the same time suppresses India on a wide range of other issues. So the objective of the US seems to be that India should neither become too weak nor too strong. It should stay somewhere in between. It should be used as something that can counterbalance China to a certain extent, but India should not be allowed to become too strong. So these actions that the US is taking will essentially hand the advantage to China in the Indo-Pacific region, and the US seems to be fine to do this even if these actions help the China in the Pacific Ocean region. So that is the deal. That's what happened, and we're going to keep an eye on these events and other important events. Thank you for watching, and I will see you soon.